Hello everyone, this is Lala and today I'm here with part 3 of Big Brother Seasons Confessionals edit/misallocation video, and of course I am discussing Era 3, which is what I like to call the modern era, which ranges from Big Brother 16 to Big Brother 22, also known as Big Brother All-Stars 2 or otherwise known as Big Brother Ass, but that's just besides the point. So, like in the last two videos, I'm going to pretty much see how a season is misallocated by looking at the overall confessionals in the season and then dividing that by the episode sum, which will be like if a person lasted 1 week and 1 week is 4 episodes, that contestant will be 4 episodes, then I'd add 7 episodes for the next boot, so on and so forth until we get to the winner who, let's just say, lasted 40 episodes. So all of that number of the amount of episodes each contestant was in will add up to the episode sum. I will divide the overall confessional amount by the episode sum to come up with a rate by episode sum. So let's just say it'll be 1 confessional per episode. Then I'm going to move on to the contestants. So let's just say contestant 1 got 2 confessionals throughout their experience and they are on 2 episodes. So their expected count would be based off of the rate by episode sum times 2. Then I would subtract that out. Yeah, I pretty much have the overall confessional amount for that contestant, then minus it with the expected count by episode amount, and then we will have a misallocation by episode. So if you range from, let's just say, negative 9.99 to 9.99, you have a fairly balanced distribution count when it comes to your diary rooms. If you have 10 and over, you are over edited, and if you have 10 and under, you have too little and are under edited. Then we are going to add up the total misallocations. So you'd add up each of the misallocation amounts that each contestant has for an overall amount. And then once you get that overall amount, you will divide that with the episode sum to come up with the percentage of the total misallocated confessionals. If that didn't make sense, I will link a few other videos where it is explained better. And I got this format from another YouTuber who used it for Survivor Australia. So different qualifications and it's just different overall. Let's just get right to it. So to start things off, Big Brother 16 has an overall confessional count of 1,899 and a total episode sum of 397, causing for a rate by episode sum of 4.7833, which is rounded up to 5 confessionals, or diary rooms. Jory has 23 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 23.916, causing for a misallocation of minus 0.9168. So it's not even, she doesn't even have a -1 diary room count. So her diary room count is very balanced. Paola has 41 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 38.26, causing for a 2.73 misallocation. So she's still in that perfect range where she really isn't under or over edited. Devin has 81 diary rooms and his expected count by episode amount is 52.61, causing for a bloated misallocation of 28.38, which I guess makes sense since he was HOH and he was backdoored in 2 of the 3 weeks and he was a huge drama magnet. Brittany has 46 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 62.18, causing for a -16.18 misallocation amount, so she's definitely under distributed. Amber has 43 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 81.317, causing for a -38.31 misallocation. This means that she's missing roughly half of the amount of diary rooms that she needed if things were evenly distributed, so she was hugely under edited. Things only get worse from here, as Jocasta has 44 diary rooms, but her expected count by episode amount is 90.88, causing for a -46.88 misallocation. So she is literally missing more than half of the diary rooms that she needed as well, so hers is even worse than Amber's. And this isn't the worst one of the season yet either. Hayden has 40 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 90.88, and he is missing 50.88 diary rooms. So his misallocation is the hugest out of the three that I literally just discussed. Zach has 138 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 119.58, costing for an 18.41 misallocation, so he's a bit over-distributed. Donnie has 140 diary rooms, where his expected count by episode amount is 138.71, costing for a 1.28 misallocation by episode, so his distribution is pretty much close to perfect, as he's only off by 1. Nicole has 144 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 138.71, and her expected count by episode amount is the same as Donnie's because she was away for a week, while her second time she was booed a week after he was, so they were in the same amount of episodes. Anyways, her misallocation by episode amount is 5.28, so she's still in that perfect median. Christine has 104 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.28, causing her to be in the negative 44.28 misallocation amount. So she's missing roughly a third of her diary rooms, essentially. Frankie has 256 diary rooms. His expected count by episode amount is 176.98. This means that he has an over-distribution of 79.01, and this really isn't shocking at all, since they really tried to push that him being Ariana's brother meant so much, and him being a social media mogul was so important. Caleb has 217 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 176.98, costing for a misallocation amount of 40, so he definitely was over-distributed as well, but obviously just nowhere near as close as Frankie. Victoria has 109 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 186.55, costing for a negative 77 misallocation amount, and honestly this might be the largest misallocation amount ever, or it's very up there, so this is really, really, really bad, even though she was irrelevant to the game. Though you could say that she was nominated several times, so she should have gotten more. Cody has 205 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 191.33, causing for a bit of an over-distribution amount pertaining to misallocation of 13.66. Derek has 268 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 186.55, causing for an over-bloated misallocation amount of 81.44. So these are the numbers of the total misallocation once I added all of them together, and once I divided it by the episode sum, I got this number. So it's not the highest, it's not the lowest, it's at negative 0.1, so some are more evenly distributed and some are less. On to Big Brother 17, which has 1,744 overall confessionals with a total episode sum of 425, causing for a rate by episode sum of 4.10, which is rounded down to 4 confessionals. So Jace got 17 diary rooms, and his expected count by the amount of episodes he lasted is 20.51, causing for a negative 3.51 misallocation. So he's still in that range of evenly distributedness. Devon got 60 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 32.82, causing for her to have a bloated 27.17 misallocation by episode amount. So she literally got almost double the amount of diary rooms that she needed or should have had if this was balanced. Jeff got 27 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 41.03, causing for a negative 0.14 misallocation, so he was a bit under-distributed. Audrey got 48 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 57.44, causing for a negative 0.944 diary room misallocation amount. And I'm honestly shocked that she was this low, but I'm assuming she didn't get a whole lot during her last week due to that meltdown, and I guess that's why she was very close to being under-edited. Jason got 82 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 65.65, causing for a 16.34 misallocation amount. So he's definitely a bit bloated, but not much. Clay got 60 diary rooms, and his expected catch by episode amount is 82.07, causing for a negative 22.07 misallocation amount. And that's kind of shocking, but kind of not as well. He definitely did cause a lot of drama and was into the gameplay, but he just wasn't good with diary rooms. I think that explains this here. Shelley got 110 diary rooms during the season, and her expected catch by episode amount is 94.38, causing for a 15.61 misallocation, which makes sense because she was nominated her last 2 weeks and she won 2 HOHs. Jackie got 48 diary rooms, and her expected catch by episode amount is 90.27, causing for a negative 42 misallocation by episode, meaning that she missed half of the amount of diary rooms that she would have needed if things were evenly distributed. Becky got 68 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected catch by episode amount is 102.58, causing for a negative 34.58 diary rooms. And I guess this kind of makes sense because she really wasn't on either alliance, she wasn't causing any drama, and she wasn't really nominated or winning many competitions. Meg got 84 diary rooms, and her expected catch by episode amount is 131.31, causing for a negative 47 misallocation. James got 162 diary rooms, and his expected catch by episode amount is 131.31, meaning that he has a misallocation by episode amount of 30.68, and it was clear that the producers weren't thrilled with many of their early to mid jurors, and the fact that he got so much more screen time compared to them just proves that. So Julia got 69 diary rooms, and her expected catch by episode amount is 119. This causes her to have a negative 50 misallocation, and this kind of makes sense due to the twin twist where she was missing for a lot of the first few weeks, and she wasn't the main twin in the beginning, so she kind of suffered the same thing that Natalie from Big Brother 5 did. But when she came back, she really didn't do much of anything. She really wasn't winning competition, she wasn't active strategically, and she wasn't getting into drama, so that misedit just continued onwards. Austin got 181 diary rooms, and his expected catch by episode amount is 151.83. So this causes for a misallocation amount of 29.16, and this definitely makes sense due to him having that huge persona and being one of the more strategically implemented house guests of the season. John got 202 diary rooms. His expected catch by episode amount is 151.83. This caused him to have a misallocation amount of 50.16. So essentially, yeah, he got a quarter more diary rooms than he should have because I guess they felt like his yelling was entertaining. That's besides the point. Vanessa got 235 diary rooms, and her expected catch by episode amount is 160, causing for a 74.96 misallocation, and that makes sense since she was the main strategist, personality, and narrator of the season. Liz got 156 diary rooms, and her expected catch by episode amount is 151.83, causing for a 4.16 misallocation. So her distribution week and her diary rooms are very consistent and balanced. Steve got 135 diary rooms, and his expected catch by episode amount is 160.03, causing for a negative 25.03 misallocation by episode. They gave him a lot more diary rooms at the last third of the season, but this misallocation was a lot larger in the beginning of the season because he really just didn't have much, and they clearly gave him content because they needed to. Okay, so as you see here, this was the total misallocation once I added all the misallocations of the 17 house guests up, and once I divided that by the episode sum, the number was way too small, so yeah, that's all I have for Big Brother 17. Big Brother 18 has 1,851 overall confessionals with an episode sum of 413. And with the former being divided by the latter, we have an overall rate by episode sum of 4.48. So this is the average amount of confessionals or diary rooms that someone should have in each episode if things were evenly distributed. Glenn has 16 confessionals throughout the season, and his expected catch by episode amount is 8.96, causing for a misallocation amount of 7.03, which is still in the right median. Josiah has 29 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 22.4, causing for a 6.59 misallocation, which is still in the nice median. Bronte got 40 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 49.3. She just misses the under misallocated amount as she has a negative 9.3 misallocation by episode. Tiffany has 70 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 62.74, causing for a 7.25 misallocation by episode. So she is in the range of most pre-jurors, where they are all relatively evenly distributed. Frank definitely breaks it here, as he has 97 diary rooms and an expected count by episode amount of 80.6, causing for an over misallocation amount by 16, which makes sense since he is a vet, but based on how they felt about him in Big Brother 14, this is kind of less than you would expect. So Devon got 144 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 94.11. This causes for a huge misallocation of 49.881, and this really isn't shocking because they clearly saw her as one of the diary room queens of the franchise, and she's also a vet. This means that she got a third more, or 34% more diary rooms than she should have gotten based off of this. Zakia got 39 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 107.56. This causes for a misallocation of negative 68, meaning that she's missing 2/3 of the diary rooms that she should have had. Things don't get much better for Bridget, as she got 55 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 107.56, causing for a negative 552.56 misallocation, meaning that she's essentially missing half of the confessionals that she should have gotten if things were evenly distributed. Polly got 151 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 121. This causes for him to have a 29.99 misallocation by episode, and this clearly isn't shocking since he is one of the standout newbies, whether you liked or hated him, and he's one of the better narrators, and he was more relevant, so this kind of just makes sense. So the trend for the early to mid jurors, on average having poor diary room distribution, continues with Michelle, as she got 96 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 152.38, causing her to have a negative 56.38 misallocation, meaning that she's missing a third of the diary rooms that she should have had if things were fairly distributed. Natalie got 120 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 165.82 diary rooms. This causes for a misallocation of negative 45.82. Honestly, this is still pretty bad, but it could have been a lot worse, especially compared to some of the other women newbies in the season. But this is clearly not good. Victor got 177 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 147.9. This causes him to have a 29.09 misallocation, so he is definitely over-distributed. Corey got 116 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 179.27, causing for a negative 63.27 misallocation amount, and I don't know about the numbers for sure, but I'm pretty sure he's missing a third of the diary rooms that he should have had. And I believe he is the only male newbie on the cast that has a negative misallocation, especially one of this magnitude. So, yeah. James has 179 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 188.23, causing for a misallocation of negative 9.23, so he barely managed to stay in that nice median. Things get ridiculous with Paul, as Paul got 293 diary rooms and expected episode count, or episode amount, based off the diary count of 188.23. He essentially has a misallocation by episode amount of 104.76. I don't think anyone has this large of a misallocation in a positive direction. So he just got shoved in our faces all the way around to an obnoxious point of view. Nicole got 229 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 188.23, causing for a 40.76 misallocation. And this really isn't that much of a shock since she is a veteran and they like her anyways. And Nicole knew what to do for the diary room to get to the narration that they wanted, despite her not being the best diary room person. So the total season misallocation, which I did by adding all the misallocation for a house guest, is 5.15, and then I divided that by the episode sum, and I got the number that's showing at the very bottom. So yeah. Big Brother 19 brings us right into the middle of the era where it has 1,811 overall diary rooms and the episode sum is 418. And dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.332 confessionals per episode per every house guest. Cameron got 12 diary rooms throughout the season. His expected count by episode amount is 4.33, causing for a 7.66 misallocation, which is still in the right median. Megan got 18 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 12.99, causing for a misallocation of 5, essentially. Jillian got 24 diary rooms, and she has an expected count of 21.66, causing for a 2.3 misallocation, so she is in that medium range. Dominique got 33 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 47.65, causing for a negative 14.65 misallocation, and this kind of makes sense since she really only got focused on her last week, but she was close to being in the perfect median. Ramsey's got 44 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 64.98, causing for a negative 20.98 misallocation. And this makes sense since he really wasn't relevant throughout the season. Jessica got 119 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 90.98, causing for a 28.01 misallocation, which makes sense since she was a huge part of the pre-jury of the season. Cody got 154 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 90.98. This means that he has a misallocation by episode amount of 63.01, and that means he got definitely about 35 to 40% more diary rooms than he should have had, but it makes sense since he caused a lot of drama in the season. He was head of household for the first week, he won some competitions, he was in a very prominent showman and was very prominent on the edit during his time there. Elena got 63 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 103.98, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 40.98, meaning that she's missing roughly 40% of the amount of diary rooms that she needed in order for this to be evenly distributed. Mark got 116 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 121.31, causing for a negative 5.31 misallocation, so he is in the perfect median/range when it comes to distribution. Matt got 72 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 134.3, causing for a negative 62.3 misallocation. He's literally missing almost half of the amount of diary rooms that he needed in order to have even distribution, but it kind of makes sense since he was just not relevant at all. Jason got 153 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 147.3, causing for a 5.69 misallocation, causing him to be in the perfect median range. Raven got 50 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 147.3. This causes her to have a negative 97.3 misallocation, so she's literally missing about 2/3, i.e. 67% of the diary rooms that she needed in order to have an evenly distributed edit. Alex got 178 diary rooms. Her expected count by episode amount is 155.97, causing for a 22.02 misallocation by episode. And this kind of makes sense because they wanted to paint her in the best light as possible and she won a decent amount of competitions. Kevin got 88 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 160.3, causing for a negative 72.3 misallocation. And this kind of makes sense because he, like Raven and Matt, really weren't relevant to the ongoings of the season. So, yeah. Christmas got 140 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 168.96, causing for a negative 28.96 misallocation out. And honestly, I am kind of shocked at this. I thought she would have had more diary rooms and a more balanced edit. So Paul got 324 diary rooms, and his or their expected count by episode amount is 168.96, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of 155.03. I'm pretty sure Paul beat his or their record when it comes to this, since I believe Paul on BB18 had the highest misallocation in the positive direction, and Paul's second iteration just beat it for sure. And it was clearly Paul's season, so this all really makes sense. Josh got 223 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 168.96, causing for a 54.03 misallocation by episode amount, and this all just makes sense. So this is the number pertaining the total misallocation and the percentage of confessionals misallocated. There really isn't much to say overall. Big Brother 20 got 1,749 confessionals and 421 episode sum number, or that's the episode sum number. And dividing the former by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.15. So that costs for an average of 4 confessionals per contestant per episode. Steve got 31 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 20.77, causing for a 10.22 misallocation by episode amount. So he literally went up to green by 0.22%. Swaggy got 56 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 33.23, causing for a misallocation amount of 22.76. And this really shouldn't be surprising if you just watch those first few weeks. Winston got 45 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 45.69, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of negative 0.69833. And he's probably the closest person to having a perfect distribution by the number. So yeah, that's very impressive. Caitlin got 70 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 58.16, causing for her to have a misallocation amount of 11.83. So she just made it over the balanced median. Rachel got 34 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 70.62, causing for a misallocation of negative 36.62. This causes her to miss a bit more than half of the diary rooms that she needed in order to have an evenly distributed edit. Bailey got 89 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 83.08, causing for a misallocation by episode amount of 5.91, so she is in that nice median range. Rockstar got 59 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 95.55, causing for a negative 36.55 misallocation amount. A part of me is shocked by this because she is so unique, but a part of me isn't either, since she really didn't win any competitions. She wasn't in power, and I feel like her allies were a bit more dynamic in comparison. Fessel got 118 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 120.47. This causes him to have a misallocation amount of negative 2.47, so he's very close to having the perfect distribution, though he's still in the balanced distribution. Scotty got 104 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 120.47, causing for a negative 16.47 misallocation. Haley got 190 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 145.4. This causes her to have a 44.59 misallocation amount, and this really isn't surprising because during the second half of her run on the season, she was the figurehead of the Underdog Alliance and the Underdog role, and she was the last one standing, so yeah, this makes sense. So many reds just looking at this. So Brett got 118 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 145.4, causing for a negative 27.4 misallocation by episode. A part of me is shocked, and a part of me is not shocked by this number. While I was editing his video, there really wasn't much content on him, and while he is funnier than all of his allies, they got a lot more of the narration, and by they, I mainly mean Tyler, especially in the first half of the season. And in the second half, Angela and Casey stepped it up where he didn't. Samantha got 120 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 153.71, causing for a negative 33.71 misallocation. And this really isn't surprising because she really wasn't relevant to the dynamics or the gameplay of the season, and it didn't seem like production liked her much anyways, and probably just found it to be exhausting. Angela got 127 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 157.86, causing for a negative 30.86 misallocation for her. She was essentially invisible for the first half of the season, so it isn't shocking. Though while she did get a bigger edit during the second half, in a lot of ways she was still overshadowed, I guess. JC got 147 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 166.17, causing for a negative 19.17 diary room misallocation amount. Tyler got 303 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 166.17, causing him to have 136.82 misallocation by episode. This means he got roughly double the amount, probably a bit less than double, but around double the amount that he should have gotten. And I think this number is higher than both of Paul's seasons. So yeah, you can definitely tell that they chose a favorite when it comes to the edit and the narration and just gave them all the content within the last few seasons. Casey got to 138 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 166.7, causing 166.17. This causes for her to have a misallocation amount of negative 28.17, and she essentially suffered from the same thing Angela did, with being invisible for the first half of the season, and while being more prominent in the second half, she was still pretty overshadowed. So these are the numbers pertaining the total misallocation and the percentages of confessionals missed. So let's just move right along. Big Brother 21 has 1,558 overall diary rooms, and the episode sum is 421. So dividing 1558 by 421, you get a rate by episode sum of 3.7, and rounding that up, that causes for it to be rounded up to 4 confessionals. So David got 19 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 29.6, causing for a negative 10.6 misallocation by episode amount. So he really just barely made it into the red zone and barely escaped the yellow. Ovi got 38 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 40.7, causing for a negative 2.7 misallocation. So he's still in that perfect range and median, and he's very close to having the perfect distribution. Kemi got 31 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 40.7, causing for a misallocation amount of negative 9.7, so she barely stayed in yellow. Isabella got 42 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 51.8, causing her to have a negative 9.8 misallocation by episode amount, and she also barely stayed in the yellow range. Sam got 63 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 62.91, causing for him to have a misallocation amount of 0.08. So he's essentially the one who has the closest to being perfectly misallocated, in my opinion, or at least so far, but that might be wrong. Jack got 85 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 74.01. This causes him to have a 10.98 misallocation by episode, so he barely made it into the green, where he is a bit overly distributed, in my opinion, based off of these numbers. Catherine got 75 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 85.11. This causes her to have a negative 10.11 misallocation amount, so she just left the yellow and barely made it in the red, so she's a bit under distributed. Annalise got 41 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 96.21. This causes her to have a misallocation of negative 55.21. This means that she's missing more than half of the amount of diary rooms that she needs in order to have a perfect distribution. Nick got 95 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 107.32, causing for a negative 12.32 misallocation. So he just missed out on being in the perfectly distributed median range. Jessica got 79 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 118.42. This causes her to have a negative 39.42 misallocation amount, and this really isn't a surprise since she was kind of always just on the outs in the dynamics, and she wasn't the most dynamic. Christy got 173 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 118.42. This causes her to have a misallocation by episode amount of 54.57. And this really isn't surprising, to be honest, since she was one of the main narrators of the season, and she got into a lot of drama, and she was probably one of the better strategists from her side of the house. Tommy got 123 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 129.52, causing for him to have a negative 6.52 misallocation amount, so he's still in the evenly distributed bracket. Cliff got 167 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 140.62, causing for a 26.37 misallocation amount. Nicole got 160 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.02, causing for a misallocation amount of 11.97. Holly got 115 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 148.02, causing for a negative 33.02 misallocation by episode amount, and that's pretty large for someone who is a finalist, especially when the endgamers all got more distribution or an even amount of distribution. Jackson got 252 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 148.02. This causes him to have a 103.97 misallocation amount, and based off the amount of people over the last few seasons that had roughly this amount of misallocation, they usually got runner-up, so the fact that he won clearly showed that production kind of got what they wanted with this one. So this is the number of the season total misallocation, which I did by adding all the misallocations that each house gets had, and then dividing it by the episode sum, which calls for the percentage of confessionals misallocated to be shown on the screen here, and that's the result. On to the final season in this era is Big Brother 22, which has an overall confessional amount of 1,575 and an episode sum of 370. So with the former being divided by the latter, we have a rate by episode sum of 4.25 confessionals, which is rounded down to 4 confessionals per house guest per episode in order to have a balanced and evenly distributed confessional diary room count and edit. Keisha got 11 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 17.02. This causes her to have a negative 6.02 misallocation amount, so she's still in the evenly distributed range. Nicole A got 21 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 29.79, causing her to have a negative 8.79 misallocation, causing her to barely be in the evenly distributed range so leaning negative. Janelle got 47 diary rooms and her expected count by episode amount is 42.56, costing for a misallocation amount of 4.43. Kaser got 56 diary rooms and his expected count by episode amount is 55.33, causing for a misallocation amount of 0.66, so he has one of the most balanced misallocations or allocations out of everyone on the shows thus far, or one of them. Bailey has 42 diary rooms in the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 68.1, and she is the first one who's severely under-edited and under-distributed, as she has a negative 26.1 misallocation amount, and this kind of makes sense since she didn't get much of an edit, and she really wasn't that relevant to the ongoings of the house, at all. Ian got 42 diary rooms throughout the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 80.87, causing him to have a negative 38.87 misallocation amount. And this isn't shocking since he missed out on roughly half of the diary rooms that he should have gotten, but he really wasn't relevant to anything that was happening in the season, and he wasn't dynamic whatsoever. Devon got 102 diary rooms throughout the season, and her expected count by episode amount is 93.64, causing her to have a misallocation amount of 8.35, and this is the first season where she has a relatively balanced distribution amount, meaning she isn't overly distributed. Kevin got 95 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 106.41, causing for a negative 11.41 misallocation, so he barely made it into the under-distributed point of view, or mark. David got 84 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 106.41, causing for a negative 22.41 misallocation amount. Danielle got 99 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 106.41, causing her to have a negative 7.41 misallocation amount. And I think this is the first season where she also was perfectly distributed, or at least in that range, compared to being overly distributed. So Tyler got 128 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 119.18, causing for an 8.81 misallocation by episode amount. So he was close to being over distributed, but he's still in the evenly distributed range, which is definitely a huge contrast compared to how he was on his prior season. Memphis got 98 diary rooms, and his expected count by episode amount is 131.95, costing for a negative 33.95 misallocation amount. And I'm honestly shocked by this because he won quite a few HOHs throughout the season, but he really just didn't get much screen time when it comes to this, which I found pretty interesting. Christmas got 150 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 144.72, causing for a 5.27 misallocation amount. Nicole F. got 186 diary rooms, and her expected count by episode amount is 157.5, causing for a misallocation amount of 28.5. And I believe in all three of her seasons, she always got more distribution when it comes to her diary room count, or it's bloated. Enzo got 186 diary rooms, like Nicole, and his expected count by episode amount, like Nicole, is 157.5. And like Nicole, he has a misallocation amount of 28.5. I've never seen something where two finalists have the exact same amount of diary rooms and all that stuff, so I found that to be pretty neat. Cody got 228 diary rooms throughout the season, and his expected count by episode amount is 157.5, causing for a 70.5 misallocation amount. And this really isn't shocking, since they tend to do this with a lot of their winners, especially during this era or the people that they project to win. The season total misallocation amount is here, and the percentage is very clear, and it's all very, very, very small. So that is it for this era. Alrighty, and that is it for the modern era when it comes to the diary room distributions. And it was definitely interesting watching the misallocations get larger and larger, either in a positive or a negative direction. And I feel like this was the time where they were really pushing one person to be the sole narrator of each of the seasons and who they projected that they were going to win, which is why a lot of the seasons in this era had people who made it to the hundreds in the positive or the negative misallocation. So when it comes to the postmodern era or the diversity era, I'm going to wait until Big Brother 26 is finished for obvious reasons, but I'm not going to do a separate era video for that because we have no idea when this era is going to end. So I'm going to combine the videos for all three eras and then tack on Big Brother 23 to 26 on there. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content on both channels soon. Take care.